Okay. Hello, everybody. Whether you're watching this now or later, we're going to start this meeting off with an introduction of myself and Ian. Ian is part of BVSIL, Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living, and I am part of Disability in Action. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself, what I do for Disability in Action, and my disability. Um, so I am an online independent living specialist for Disability in Action. I basically run all of our online programs and information that's online based. Um, I was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy when I was 6 years old, and this job right here, or this job that I'm doing now, is it's really cool for me because I get to give people my experiences with a disability, and I get to share how I deal with those things and help others deal with their disabilities. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Ian now, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Okay, so my name is Ian Beltran. I work for the Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living, and that's I work remotely from Abilene, Texas, and BVSIL is located in the Brazos Valley, which is Bryan College Station. And I basically handle transportation scheduling for BVSILs. We have a transportation service that's basically there to pick up the slack where where our Brazos Valley's local transit system, they have a paratransit offerings, but we kind of pick up the slack whenever somebody can't fit into their schedule, or they have needs that are a little more specific and need to be, handled with somewhat more personal touch. So that's what I do for BVSIL. I was also diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 2001, I believe. And I've been non-ambulatory for about 12 years. And that's pretty much it. I've been with BVSIL since January of this year. And did you want me to just go ahead and start with my?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll add stuff whenever.
Okay, awesome.
Let's see.
So kind of what I'm here to discuss today is kind of figuring out mostly working from home with a disability, but these things can also apply to if you're applying for a in-person job, or a more, I guess, quote unquote regular looking job. So these things kind of will be specific to working from home, but it can kind of be reapplied in other places. Just, if you have a disability, these things would apply to you, to anyone. So kind of what I'm going to go over is just some brief points about the whole process, pretty much. Resume advice, where do I start looking? Ways to figure out if a listing is legitimate or will work for you. Applying for a work at home position or in-person job. Disclosing your disabilities, what you need to know about that. If you get picked for an interview, with that job, and advice on how to handle that. Dealing with rejection at any point. Um, they may tell you before you even interview that they're looking for someone else, or they may wait until after the interview to let you know that they're moving with someone else. And then also, if you do get employed, what comes after that, pretty much. So I think I'll just dive right in with the resume advice. It's pretty straightforward and simple. I mean, you want it to look as professional as possible, and that means kind of just making sure that it sounds concise, and it's kind of going over. You kind of want to include anything and everything, just about that. That, especially if it's something that's similar to the desired position, you'll definitely want to include anything that sounds good, or even is closely related to what you're looking for. So for example, I volunteered at DIA for a long time, doing essentially front desk work. So kind of when I was looking for jobs and stuff, I was searching for similar things, like similar titles like administrative assistant, receptionist, kind of. Um, those two are kind of similarly related, but they're a little bit different. You also kind of want to be mindful of highlighting skills and abilities that would help your chances of getting into that position, because a lot of times when you're filling out an application for certain places, a lot of those managers or recruitment managers, a lot of times they have keyword filtering on their in their in the on their when they receive applications. So essentially, what it does is they're trying to filter out resumes that may not fit. So that's kind of a good thing for them and a bad thing for those applying, because if your resume is good but it doesn't have certain keywords, then they won't even have a chance to see it a lot of the time, because their software will filter it out, and they won't even see it, even though you probably may be fitting correctly. They may have a few keywords missing off of your resume, and that'll just lessen your chances. Also, I would say most places may or may not ask for a cover letter, but it's a good idea just to make one, just in case they do need it. In my experience, I didn't really, the cover letters weren't really necessary, because I did have a few interviews lined up after finding jobs and stuff, and they some of them, the 2 or 3 that I did, they didn't ask for a cover letter, so I didn't really make one, but that's something good to consider for most jobs, because they probably will ask you for one, and just having one that's and you may have to take a cover letter and tweak it a little bit to a specific company, and that's just another helpful thing that might work. And then kind of once you've got a resume going and it's and you feel confident in it, then I would say that that's the time to start looking. And a a lot of the time, um, you'll probably want to start with the free options. Um, and there's quite a few good ones. Because a lot of times nowadays, um, a lot of the job search websites either have you create a login, or a lot of them are a subscription based, um, based on monthly, a monthly charge. A lot of them. Probably some of my personal options that I was using for in terms of free stuff. Um, there's a website called ratracerebellion.com, and that's a great resource, especially if you're looking for jobs that are not necessarily in an office. A lot of their jobs that they post are exactly working from home and remote positions. A lot of their stuff that they post, and they have been around for a long time, so they kind of know what to look for and know what um, they know a lot of the legitimate job listings, and that's all that they post is legitimate stuff that is either um, they have some freelance things, um, they have part-time stuff, full-time stuff, um, and then they also kind of have um, legitimate ways to make extra money. But most people with disabilities, if they have if you're either on SSI or SSDI or something similar to that, a lot of the times you can't really do side jobs per se. Um, so a lot of their stuff on there is that, but they do also have, you know, um, set pay rate jobs. So then that way it makes it easier for someone with, who's on benefits. It'll make it easier for them to stay on their benefits and be able to report a regular wage every month. So ratracerebellion.com, ratracerebellion. And then another good option is called Glassdoor. And they're pretty good, and they also sometimes have articles on their blog about companies that are looking specifically for work at home and remote position people. And a lot of these jobs, the good and bad thing about them is the flexibility of hours in a lot of these things. So it could work out that someone is more I guess their schedule fits better like in the evenings to work for some people. Kind of just depending on their situation and when they can get assistance during the day from home health or family members or that sort of thing. So it's good that they're flexible in their hours, and sometimes it's bad because if you're someone that has a PCA or a home health that is on a regular schedule, that may be difficult to fit your work schedule to their work schedule. But yeah, that shouldn't be too difficult. And Glassdoor also is very good if you do search for work at home. Their database is pretty good about sending you to pages that are legitimate and that sort of thing. And also another free option, Indeed is a good option, but it's still free, um, but it can be kind of hit or miss in searching for stuff because kind of, and now this will kind of lead into my next point, but they sometimes they will have stuff that is legitimate, but they don't really detail everything about the job. A lot of times they don't tell you that it's part-time, or they don't tell you really the pay rate until you're already like in the process of looking into until you're way past the job listing, and then they let you know that. So you kind of have to be cautious of that on the regular job search sites. And pay having a paid job search site is also a decent option if you can afford it. Um, it it does help somewhat with filtering out some of those jobs that don't look as good, I guess, opposed to um, a regular hourly job. So if you can't afford a paid job search site, then that is helpful, but it's not really necessary.
I would like to add one more source for finding jobs. It's also free, but it's actually in person. A lot of times, Texas Workforce Commission offices around the state have something called Job Club. And basically, what that is you go in and they teach you everything from resumes to how to interview. And they have connections most of the time throughout the community, and uh, they can pass along what you can do in those types of things to get you in the door. Um, Even if they don't have a job club, you can go to their office in your local area, and they will likely help you. So that's one more option as far as free support for finding a job.
Yes, for sure. Um, and a lot of times, if you are on Social Security and you're getting benefits, a lot of the times you'll already kind of be um, included into TWC. Um, they'll already um, be helping you. A lot of the times they start you off in high school, like helping you um, plan out your kind of your next move after graduating and getting into a job and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's also a good resource. Okay, and really I think that's all I had on that. So kind of the next thing, after you've been looking and you're kind of know what you're looking for and that sort of thing. Sometimes you will find stuff uh, that it seems legitimate, and a lot of times they are, but they just don't detail um, everything that you need to know, and it's kind of a sketchy situation, especially, and it's less so nowadays, given I guess the COVID situation and kind of uh, how a lot of things are transitioning to online, uh, even outside of COVID. Uh, so it's getting better to find and easier to find working from home jobs that actually work and are actually a good idea for people with disabilities. And then it's kind of all about kind of using context clues within the listing. Um, a lot of times um, they'll give like a pay rate, but it's kind of um, and it is based on hourly, but it's kind of hit or miss. Um, a good thing to do is if you see a company name or something like that on there, an easy thing to do is just take that company name and Google search it. Because a lot of times people will be talking about, you know, this company isn't, you know, they'll be essentially be discussing what if the company is legitimate or not, and kind of people. A lot of times people online will already be talking about, you know, that don't go with this company, or you know, giving you kind of upfront warning about what the company is about. Because a lot of times it'll say working from home, um, and then it's really it is working from home, but they're not. It's not as well paying, or is, you know, it's kind of um, a difficult job essentially, and it's a lot of times those things are it's harder to make money with some of those, and especially like it it's kind of essentially freelancing with a lot of those postings that don't seem legitimate or aren't giving you full details on what the job is about. So it's kind of a good thing to be mindful of those things, and Google searching, um, just to figure out, you know, if something's legit. And then also, a lot of times that helps with deciding if a job will be a good fit for someone with a disability. Because you kind of, and it's pretty obvious, but you have to be mindful of, you know, physical, um, I guess, requirements. Sometimes those companies do have um, legitimate physical requirements, and a lot of times, unfortunately, those things are kind of set in place essentially to keep people from with disabilities from applying, because a lot of times those um, it can look like it's, you know, a regular reception job, and then somewhere in there they have must be able to lift 30 pounds. And a lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times that's kind of put in there to kind of uh, keep people with disabilities from applying. Um, I haven't seen that much, but I have witnessed it in a few. Um, you know, even just applying for like an administrative assistant or receptionist job, there are things in there that, and yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that some people would feel the need to do that, but that's just kind of how it goes. Um, okay, so kind of after you've got a resume going, you've been looking, and you know, have some leads that are, you know, you think you want to follow through on. So it's so then you'll start, you know, applying for those positions. Uh, and it probably, you know, just being, and at that time you can either, so kind of at this point you can either have let them know in your resume that you have a disability, Um, and really that's kind of at everyone's discretion, kind of how soon they want to um, let a job know that. Um, and a lot of the times, it, you know, let's see. And a lot of times, you know, in the job search, people with disabilities, um, mental health conditions or other circumstances, um, you know, you're kind of confronted with, do I disclose to a potential employer, you know, my disability?
Yeah.
And so essentially, um, with the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, um, it has two specific things for, you know, people seeking work and that sort of thing. The first one is that it makes it illegal for employers to discriminate against applicants or employees with mental or physical disabilities. It requires employers to provide for reasonable accommodations if an employee or job candidate has a disability. Um, Kind of the thing is though, if you don't disclose your disability to an employer, they're not required to make those reasonable accommodations. So you can kind of be discretionary on when you want to, you know, let them know that you have a disability, but it needs to be um, sometime before you start working for them. So if you do get to the interview and you haven't let them know, that may be the best time to let them know. Um, or you may have already included that in your resume. So, and an employer can't, you know, ask you about your disability during the interview process. So you kind of have to, um, so they can't ask you things like, what's your medical history? Do you have any disabilities or mental health conditions? How's your health? How often do you call in sick to work? Have you ever gone to rehab? Um, but what they can ask you is, are you able to perform the essential responsibilities of the job with reasonable accommodation? Um, they can also ask you, are you a person with a disability? With answers like yes, no, and prefer not to say. And it's kind of a that's kind of a way that they present it so that you can voluntarily disclose um, your disability, and it's a legal it's a legal situation in certain circumstances. Um, Specifically when the answer may be used for affirmative action, but yeah. Um, let's see. And kind of there's like three things you should consider when you're deciding whether and how to disclose your disability. Um, the first one is, will you need any reasonable accommodations? Before putting in an application, review the job description to make sure you'll be able to do the core things that they want, um, and get a sense of any specific accommodations that will help you do your job. So you kind of, if you do need reasonable accommodations, then you probably should be disclosing your disability. So then that way they can't go back and say, well, you didn't tell us, so we can't give you reasonable accommodations. The second thing to think about is, will not disclosing make the process of applying for and landing more difficult or impossible. So in other words, if if you fail to share the information about a disability, um, will that make answering interview questions harder? Um, that may be a good sign that disclosing early on is what's right for you. So just keep in mind that a disability can serve as an explanation for a gap in work history as well. And then the third thing is, can you tell if the employer is supportive, publicly at least, of people with disabilities? Look for signs on the company's website that they support applicants or employees with disabilities. For example, um, looking for messages on the company's career page that say things like, if you have a disability or special need that requires accommodation, please contact us by emailing, uh, company@companyemail.com. And let's see. And then kind of the last thing um, on disclosing is kind of when and how. So if you do decide to disclose, um, like I've said, you can do it at any time during the application or any time while you're employed. So not disclosing in the past doesn't preclude an employer from providing reasonable accommodation in the future and present. Once you disclose, whenever you do so, they are required to provide those accommodations. So, and there's a few things to consider when deciding, how to time your disclosure, basically. Will the employer find information about your disability by researching you online? More than 90% of recruiters search for applicants online. If your social media profiles, blog posts, your online presence essentially makes it clear that you have a disability, you may decide to disclose earlier in the process. This may allow you to better control and craft how that employer looks at you, essentially, because you're starting the conversation and you're initiating, telling them about, what makes you stronger for the job and your, best qualifications. And then, of course, again, will you need reasonable accommodations? And then kind of decide how much and in what ways you want to disclose. So basically kind of certain situations you'll have to learn, you have to disclose early on, either on the application or in an interview, because employers would likely Google your name and your resume would appear sparse, bare kind of if you remove your disability related content. Your initial disclosure is not the last conversation you'll have, obviously, and you don't have to include everything about, every detail about your disability, but include some of the major things that may or may not affect your performance and that sort of thing. So just kind of that, so that everyone's kind of aware of what your needs are and what could possibly happen. And then kind of just be thinking about what you'll say. And it's kind of just like a job interview, essentially. Just think about, prepare some thoughts ahead of time and be brief and just talk about your strengths and what you can do rather than focusing on what you can't. And then kind of just some advice on that, be positive. Be prepared to answer any concerns expressed by employers. And just be be constantly kind of thinking about what accommodations do I need, um, and then letting employers know ahead of time, and then that way they can budget out things, and if you give them enough time, a lot of the times they will do what they need to. Um, and I kind of say that mostly because um, working at a SIL, they already kind of understand um, that if you have a disability, you're going to need accommodations and stuff. So there are the places that are familiar with disability um, and familiar with employees that have disabilities. They're going to do probably better, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't seek those things out in other positions. If they're not, if they aren't a SIL and you're working for them, then you still need to be thinking about those things and making sure that you can do your job. Um, a lot of times companies, um, a lot of times they want you to be able to do your job. So a lot of times they'll help with getting those things. Okay, so that's kind of all background stuff, kind of for when you get interviewed. So a lot of the times, since it's work from home, these are work from home positions. A lot of times they will want a video interview, and those can be tough. Um, Probably won't know where to look. Do you look at your computer screen or the camera or both? What things to say, how long should your answers be, and that sort of thing. Um, and for people with disabilities, those can be um, more difficult. Um, so kind of, you want to present yourself in the best light. So before your interview, just think about, um, see how the device you're going to be using, like your computer or a tablet or smartphone, will make you look to others, essentially. Um, because you most of the time want to be evaluated on your knowledge, skills, and you know what you can bring to the table, um, without someone making assumptions before they even really interview you. Um, so one thing to do um, is to manage the technical element of the video as part of the interview preparation. So in other words, opting for Skype, what you can do beforehand is Skype or FaceTime with a friend or family member, just to see how you look and where you might need to make some corrections in terms of lighting and that sort of thing. And like with my camera, for example, I'm a little bit whitewashed, just because there is um, a big window essentially behind my work setup. So that's you kind of want to think about those things when you're doing a video interview. And then you may not be trying to hide your assistive equipment like wheelchairs and canes and that sort of thing, but you may not feel comfortable with that being the first and foremost thing that they see, and that's fine. And once again, you got to know your rights. It's illegal for them to ask you about your disability. If it is visible, though, they can ask you if you they'll ask they can ask you about if you require accommodations again. Things like a standing desk or special equipment to help you, work successfully. It's up to you then to decide if you want to address that with your interviewer or not. So, and the good thing is some employers actually want to know about that since they know the positive impact hiring you for the job would make not only in your life, but for their company as well. So it's kind of a
I'd like to add one thing on if you need assistive technology. I do believe that the TWC, or Texas Workforce Commission, if you are involved with them in your job finding process, I do believe that they will pay for certain assistive equipment that you may need. So that may be something you want to bring up to an employer if they ask you about it. Of course, like if your disability is visible, that is something you might want to bring up to them if they're worried about that, which they shouldn't be, but they might be. So
yeah. That's definitely also a good point because TWC is, I mean, they're there to help you be successful essentially. So if an employer is, has a concern about those adaptive things, then yes, that's definitely a good thing to bring up. Is that if you have a case on file with TWC, then that's also a really good thing to let an employer know. So then that way, if they are concerned about, making sure you get adaptive stuff, then they won't have to be as concerned with the money part of it. Because I'm sure that's a lot of people's hang up
yeah.
in getting adaptive things for people with disabilities. It's always a money thing a lot of the times. So kind of assuring them may actually help your chances because then they won't feel as, I guess, burdened, even though they shouldn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll definitely help your chances. Yeah, TWC is a great resource for a lot of those things. And then kind of while you're interviewing, just be beforehand. I would like practice some of your answers. Um, because it's easy to get flustered um, during an interview. And like I guess if you're trying to um, avoid the disability discussion, that can make it harder. So it's kind of like if you when you feel most comfortable revealing your disability. A lot of times you can't really, if it's a visible disability, then you'll just have to be kind of prepared to um, handle that, tackle that situation as it comes up. And probably a good idea is, and this is probably rehashed advice, but do mock interviews, um, and that can help you rehearse, why you're qualified, and explain what it is that makes you want to work for that company. If you're interviewing for a remote job, should also uh, mention the some of the skills that would help you as a remote job worker. Um, and they're kind of pretty self-explanatory. Ability to work independently, self-motivation, strong written communication skills, um, comfort in learning and using digital tools. That's definitely a big one, especially if you're someone with a disability and you're, working remotely. Then those are big pluses. Um, if you're kind of tech savvy and able to um, easily adapt to different digital tools that company may be using. For example, stuff like Teams. A lot of companies use Teams kind of to communicate, um, even in person, even if they're all in the same office. A lot of companies use Teams as a, sort of a video conferencing sort of thing, and stuff like Zoom and that sort of thing, and just being good at that stuff, and also being a team player. That really helps. Um, because usually you'll be working at home alone, but it doesn't mean you're not part of a team. And communicating and collaborating are really kind of vital, especially if you're, um, in a remote location away from that job. It's always good to be communicating. Um, and a lot of places, I was lucky enough that BV did provide me with computer equipment and that sort of thing. Um, a lot of employers won't do that. Um, so you may be responsible for getting those tools. Um, for a lot of places, and if you're a person with disability, you probably, more than likely, um, have a computer. But if not, uh, oh, well, a lot of the times, if you have a computer, it's usually okay for an employer. Um, some of them, though, may have requirements that mean buying new equipment. Some of them, like let's say, might have a requirement for only using Macs because that's what their whole company and system is kind of set up around. Um, so you kind of have to think about, purchasing other equipment. A lot of times, um, they'll either provide you with some of those things, like headsets and software such as Word and other things that are productivity software, um, and then kind of you'll be kind of responsible for internet and that sort of thing, um, just because it's your home and that sort of thing, and they can't really. It would be different if you were working in the office, um, and that you would just use their internet. But if you're working from home, obviously that's not the case. Okay. So I think, let's see. And then kind of the last thing is like offer solutions about, like Justin mentioned, bringing up TWC and that sort of thing, and mentioning things that could, you know, help you. Um, and it can be easy for an employer to be distracted by your disability, but that's only if you let it happen, essentially. Um, and it's kind of why it's a good thing to, um, get the spotlight kind of off of what what you might see as limitations, and show what you can do. Um, Obviously, don't ignore those things, and make sure that you get the accommodations you need. But and you just kind of have to explain, you know, that you might need certain equipment to help you work. And really that's kind of the end goal of those adaptive aids is like letting your employer know, hey, this will help me get my job done. And a lot of times they will get on it, you know, as well as they can, you know, in certain situations. And then just talk about examples of how you've worked with your disability in the past and you know, overcoming certain obstacles and that sort of thing. Okay. And then kind of the next thing is like, so if at any point in this process, they, let's say they, after they get your resume, a lot of times that's when they will say, okay, we're going to either interview you or you will get an email basically along the lines of, um, we're still looking for someone, you know, basically that they've decided to go keep looking, or they, you know, decide to pick someone else. And you really kind of have to um, be prepared for that. And it may not even be um, pertaining to your disability. It may be just that they did find somebody better. And there's always that possibility. Um, no matter your capabilities physically, a lot of the times that doesn't factor in, which is good. Then there are times where it was your disability and they're gonna go with someone else that maybe doesn't need as much um, assistance and accommodations. Um, and it may be that was probably a good thing because if a company is not willing to do what's necessary to help an employee, then that may not be a good place, a good fit for someone with a disability. If they're not willing to even put in the minimum effort in the first place, then it may be a good thing if they went with someone else. And they may interview you, and you may get pretty far in the interview process, and they may still tell you no. And those are usually the situations where it was that they just picked someone else, and it was not nothing really on to put blame on anybody. And it was just they picked somebody else. So you just kind of have to be, you know, uh, mentally prepared for those things. Just kind of be ready in case they say no at any point. And the flip side to that is that they hire you. So basically, and then once they hire you, you know, depending on, you know, if you've revealed your disability, if you've disclosed your disability already, then you may already be working with them to get your adaptive equipment set up before you know, hit the ground running, so to speak, and start working for them. So you may already be in the process of, you know, getting what you need, essentially. And that's probably the biggest thing when you're starting with a new company is just, you know, getting acclimated to and it may be that it's your first time working and you don't really know what you need per se in terms of assistive things. So it may be that you think a certain thing will work and it turns out it won't. You just kind of have to be upfront and alert your employer to, hey, I thought this was going to work for me. Turns out it's not working. Can we look into other things to help me, be productive and, do my job? So it's really, once you do get hired, you kind of need to be on top of, uh, you know, making sure you have what you need, and advocating for yourself. You just have to really make sure that you're letting people know ahead of time, and it's going to help you in the long run, and it's going to help your career in the long run, I suppose. And really, I think that's the main thing when you start working, is just communication, um, and making sure you have what you need, and also kind of uh, letting your employer be aware of if certain physical conditions start to worsen, or if uh, it again goes back to the communication thing. Just letting them know if your needs start changing, and uh, if you are like full time, and you uh, it's starting to get to where you're too fatigued to do it full time, then a good idea would be to say, hey, what can we um, what can we do to either reduce my hours, or if they're flexible enough, they may just allow you to move your hours around, so that um, if you're a person with a certain disability that leads you to being fatigued or tired at different times, then maybe if you're working from home, uh, they'll be flexible enough to let you kind of move your hours a little bit. Um, I in working for BB my hours are, um, and I kind of discussed them with my boss, and we kind of figured out what would work for me. And I work from 10 to 5:30. So, and I work Monday through Friday. So essentially, it was the reason my day starts at 10 is just because um, I usually wake up about 8:30, and get ready for the day, and usually my home health, or PCA, uh, they usually begin work around 8 o'clock. So with my needs, it's kind of I need kind of those 2 hours to be able to get up and get dressed, and get something to eat, and all that sort of thing. And that gives me ample time to get those things done, and then be able to clock in, instead of having to be like rushed in the morning, and forcing yourself to you know uh, to be worried about, am I going to be able to clock in on time because of this and this. So yeah. And I really think that's about it.
Okay. On that subject, or just uh,
um yeah, just kind of just on all of it, really.
okay.
That's kind of my last point. Yes.
So I'm just gonna add one more thing to the end of this.
For sure.
It's just marketing yourself within an interview.
Yes.
So what you can do a lot of the time is turn your disability into positives in how you approach things.
Yes.
Um, so a lot of the times with a disability, we face challenges every day, uh, multiple times a day, just working around stuff
Yes.
and getting what you need to get done. So what you can tell them is my problem solving skills are uh, very good because I practice using them a lot.
Yes.
Or um, you could say that you're not afraid of an obstacle and you actually enjoy tackling obstacles. Of course, you may not enjoy it, but you're good at it.
Yeah. You at least
Um,
know what you're doing.
and you are, when you go into your interview, don't go in with pity on yourself. So don't go in being like, oh man, I'm not very good at this and they're not going to hire me because I have physical limitations. Instead, go in with confidence. You are an asset to that company. Um, sure, you may be expensive to train and get on board in the beginning, but once you're in there, uh, people with disabilities have a unique skill set and a positive skill set for a workplace.
For
And
sure.
depending on how the interview is going, one other thing you could bring up are some statistics. I'm not sure how exactly you would want to bring a statistic up, um, but as far as retention rates go, um,
Mhm.
people with disabilities have a much higher retention rate than those who do not in more basic jobs. So the statistics I found were from the Chicago Lighthouse, which is uh, a Chicago area version, pretty much, of an independent living center, which is what we have here in Texas. And they did a study and found that people with disabilities have a 1.7-year retention rate, and people without a disability have a 0.9-year retention rate. So if they are worried about the cost of training you and uh, accommodating you, you can bring that up and say, hey, you won't have to go through training twice, but you'll only have to go through training for a longer period of time one time. Um, and that's pretty much all I have. Also, I just wanted to add that here at the end. Um,
For sure. And kind of just adding on to the sort of statistics thing, uh, a job search site recently did. Um, they surveyed, people that are specifically seeking remote and flexible work, and they said that 11% of those people um, were dealing with a chronic physical illness or issue, um, and 4% saying they live with mental illness. So the short story is, that a lot of people in the workforce are impacted by disabilities.
mhm. All right. Uh, well, I
But
guess
yeah,
that's all I have, and uh, so that's all you have too, Ian.
yeah, and
Okay.
just to your point about having confidence, it really does help. I had 2 or 3 interviews last year, and I personally thought that they went well, and that was because I felt like um, I would be a good asset, and I was confident that I could get those jobs. And um, kind of after you get, after they give you a no, sometimes you kind of feel like, uh, oh, it was my disability and that sort of thing. And a lot of the times it might be, but a lot of the time it's not, and it's just they went with somebody else. So yeah, that's all I have on the
All
comment.
right. Thanks to everybody that tuned into this live stream on Facebook, and always remember that uh, you're you're allowed to come into the meetings and participate also if you would like. They're completely open for anybody to join. Um,
Mhm.
and if you have any questions, you can contact me at my email, which is justin.j koop@disabilityinaction.org. Just if you're curious about joining our streams in the future.
Mhm.
So that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you everybody for watching. Please consider filling out the survey here in the description of this video. These surveys help keep this grant going for years in the future. Thanks.